Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to fight not just for your life, but for the very right to be seen as human in the shadows of the high-wind prairie? A young woman carried scars no one should ever bear, burned into her skin by men who claimed to own her future. And beside her, a broken soldier, haunted by war, had to choose stand and fight against impossible odds or watch her be taken again. What would you do if the law was nothing but a weapon in the hands of the corrupt? If freedom meant spilling blood, would you have the courage to pull the trigger? This is not just a story of survival, but of choices that define who we are when the world strips everything else away. It's about a woman who refuses to be silenced, and a soldier who rediscovers purpose in her fight for dignity. Stay with us as we step into their journey where love is born from pain, and freedom is paid for in fire. If this story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can walk every step of this journey with us. Clearwater Creek wound its way through the limestone ridges that spring morning, shallow and fast, as if God himself had pressed a finger through the rock to carve its path. The air was cool, the kind of air that carried the smell of wet cedar and last night's rain. Caleb Ward crouched by the bank, filling his dented canteen, when he caught a sound that did not belong to the high-wind prairie. It wasn't a mockingbird's call or the wind stirring live oak leaves. It was jagged and raw, the sound of a human voice breaking under more weight than it could bear. He straightened slowly, listening. Another faint cry reached him, carried by the water. Caleb followed it downstream, boots sinking into the soft mud. 20 yards ahead, he spotted a figure crumpled against the trunk of a fallen cottonwood. A young woman lay half-hidden by roots and branches, her calico dress torn, streaked with mud. Her shoulder was soaked dark with fresh blood. She couldn't have seen more than 19 summers, with hair the color of copper catching in the morning light. When Caleb stepped closer, her eyes snapped open. They were cold and wide, blue like a winter sky that gave no promise of warmth. She scrambled backward, pressing one hand to her shoulder and the other to her skirt. "Stay back," she rasped, her voice rough and dry. "Just stay back." Caleb raised his hands, palms out, the way he used to when approaching a spooked horse. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the war in trenches, in hospitals, in men who had survived too much and trusted too little. "I'm not fixin' to hurt you," he said, voice steady. "You're bleeding. That wound needs tending." She gave a laugh so sharp it might have cut glass. "Hurt me." Her gaze slid past his shoulder as if she were staring down ghosts. "If you've got any kindness at all. Stranger, just make it quick. Don't drag it out. Just kill me fast." The words landed heavy in his chest. Caleb had heard stories in war camps, rumors of women caught in the wrong place when the world turned savage, of men who treated them worse than beasts. Those stories could sour a man's stomach. "Nobody's killing anybody," he said. "Let me look at that shoulder." She shook her head hard. "No, you don't understand. If you touch me, you'll see what they did, and then you'll want to finish what they started." "Try me," Caleb said softly. Something in his tone held her still. Caleb settled on his heels, waiting. He'd learned patience under fire, waiting out cannon barrages at Shiloh, waiting through nights when enemy scouts prowled too close. He called on that patience now. The creek burbled at their feet, carrying the runoff toward the Guadalupe. Overhead, a red-tailed hawk circled, crying against the limestone walls. Time stretched thin. At last, the girl spoke. "My name's Lydia Mae." Caleb tipped his hat slightly. "Caleb Ward." She flinched at the courtesy. "Don't bother being polite. Nothing pleasant left in knowing me." "Maybe so," he said, "but I'd still like to help. Let me see that wound. Lydia, I've got clean cloth in my saddlebag." She hesitated, studying him as if searching for the trap in his offer. Then, with effort that seemed to pain her more than the bullet graze itself, she pulled her trembling hand away from her shoulder. The calico was torn ragged, likely snagged on brush during her flight. Blood oozed from a furrow in the flesh, a bullet's near miss, painful, but survivable. Caleb moved carefully, rinsing the wound with creek water. She flinched but did not pull away. "This'll heal clean," he murmured. "Bullet only kissed you." She gave a bitter half-smile. "That's me, all right. Luck of Lydia." As he worked, Caleb noticed more. Old bruises yellowed along her arms. Her lip had once split and healed crooked, and when the fabric of her dress shifted, revealing pale skin above her knee, he froze. Burned deep into her thigh was a brand, not an accident, not a scar, a word seared into flesh by iron. One word: property. Lydia jerked the fabric down, her face ashen as creek foam. "Now you know," she whispered. "Now you see what I am." Caleb sat back, jaw tight. In 4 years of war, he had seen men carve each other to pieces, had smelled burn-in camps, had buried friends by the dozen. But this, branding a woman as livestock, this was a cruelty beyond war. "I see what they did to you," he said finally, "not what you are." Tears broke loose then. Lydia covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking. Her words came muffled. They kept a place, called it a stockyard, not for cattle, for women, debts unpaid, husbands gone, unlucky when the soldiers came through. They locked us in, sold us, marked us. Caleb felt a heat rise in his chest. The same fury he'd known when his regiment had been slaughtered under artillery fire. But this wasn't about armies. This was men who had let go of their humanity. "How'd you get free?" he asked. "Fire," she whispered. 2 weeks ago. Place burned. Guard ran to save his skin. I slipped away." She looked at her bare feet, caked in mud. "Been running ever since." Caleb rose and held out his hand. "Then you can stop running now." She eyed it like it might bite her. "You don't understand. Men like that don't let their property walk away. They'll come. Let them come," he said, keeping his hand steady. "They'll find me first." Something flickered in her face. Then, not trust, not yet, but the faint possibility of it. Slowly, she placed her cold, thin hand in his. Caleb helped her to her feet. She swayed, weak from blood loss, but stood. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles from here," he said. "It's nothing fancy, but it's got a roof and a barred door. You can rest while that shoulder mends." Suspicion sharpened her words. "Why? Why would you help me? What do you want?" Caleb thought as he whistled for his mare. Ruth. The bay picked her way through the brush, ears flicking. He thought about the nights he'd spent alone in that cabin he built with his own hands, the silence heavy enough to crush him. "Maybe I'm tired of being alone," he said. "Maybe you are too." He lifted her onto Ruth's back, then swung up behind her. She stayed stiff as a fence post, every muscle taut. But as they rode along deer trails and shallow streams, some of that tension eased. By late morning they reached his hidden valley. The cabin stood in a clearing rimmed with cedar and oak, smoke curling from the chimney where he'd banked a fire before leaving. The vegetable patch, the rain barrel, the split rail fence gave the place a sense of stubborn life. "It's not much," Caleb said, helping her down. She looked at the tidy yard, the rows of beans, the worn door. "It's peaceful," she said softly, as if it were the finest compliment she could give. Inside, the cabin was plain but clean. A stone hearth anchored the room, with a table and 2 chairs, a narrow bed, a shelf with a few worn books, and pegs for his rifle and coat. It was a soldier's shelter, simple and durable, for Lydia, who had lived through cages and fire. It might as well have been a fortress. The fire in the stone hearth caught quickly, throwing orange light across the one-room cabin. Caleb Ward set another log on the flames and stood back, rubbing his palms together. The chill of an early spring storm seeped through the walls, but the warmth was holding steady. "You can take the bed," he said quietly, his voice carrying no demand, only plain fact. "I'll make do on the floor with blankets." Across the room, Lydia Mae hesitated, her hand resting on the back of a chair. She studied him as though trying to read a language she'd long forgotten. Kindness was something her world had beaten out of her. Finally she whispered, "I don't understand you." Caleb crouched by the fire and stirred the coals until sparks leapt and swirled up the chimney. "There's nothing to figure out. You're wounded, worn thin, and got nowhere else to lay your head. I've got shelter and food. That's all there is." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she sank into the chair instead. Even seated, her hand drifted to her skirt, tugging it down to hide the scarred flesh branded on her thigh. Caleb caught the motion, and his jaw tightened. Nothing about this was going to be simple. The days that followed unfolded with a rhythm that felt tentative, like 2 wild creatures circling without daring to touch. Caleb went about his chores mending gear, checking snares in the woods, tending the little patch of garden behind the cabin. Lydia Mae stayed mostly inside, perching near the small window as if measuring how far she might run if she had to. She spoke little, offering a nod when he brought coffee, shaking her head when he asked if she needed more. The wound in her shoulder scabbed over and pinked clean, but Caleb knew the deeper wounds weren't so quick to knit. On the 4th morning, he returned from hauling water and stopped at the doorway. She stood before the cracked mirror he'd nailed to the wall, staring like she didn't recognize the face staring back. "My hair used to be long," she murmured, not turning toward him. Caleb set the bucket down. "Hair grows back. They sheared it the first day." Her fingers touched the ragged ends brushing her shoulders. "Said vanity was a sin that had to be punished out of us." She faced him then, eyes raw and unguarded. "You have scissors, I do. You want it trimmed proper." A thin smile touched her lips, the kind that wasn't sure how to stay. "I'm tired of looking like a stray, half-starved cat." He dug out his shaving kit, placing the small scissors in her hands. "You sure?" She nodded and lowered herself into the chair by the fire. "Maybe if I look more like myself, I'll remember there's still something worth seeing." Caleb moved with a patience that came from years of soldiering patience that had saved his life in muddy trenches and night watches. He cut carefully, each snip letting auburn strands fall to the floor until her hair framed her face evenly, catching sparks of gold in the firelight. When he stepped back, she seemed younger, less burdened. "How's it look?" she asked, fingers brushing the ends. "You look like a person again," he blurted, then winced at his own words. "I mean, I know what you mean." She rose and studied herself in the mirror. They tried to strip that away, make us believe we were nothing, numbers instead of names, fed like animals until some began to believe it. Caleb scooped the fallen hair and tossed it into the fire. The strands curled and blackened, vanishing in smoke. What kept you from believing? For a long while she said nothing, gaze fixed on the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but low. Anger, stubbornness, maybe. Every time they tried to grind me down, something in me pushed back. I promised myself if I had to die there, I'd die still being Lydia Mae, not some number on a ledger. That night, the storm came in earnest, drumming against the roof, wind rattling the shutters. For the first time, Lydia Mae joined him at the table to prepare supper. She sliced vegetables while he fried salt pork, and, though they barely spoke, the silence felt different, less like distance, more like shared ground. At the table, she surprised him again. "You got family," Caleb poked at his beans. "Had a brother, Daniel. Lost him at Fredericksburg. Pa died of fever before I joined. Ma passed soon after. Too much grief for one woman." He shrugged, forcing the ache aside. "It's old history now. I'm sorry," she said softly. "What about you?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Small farm near Austin. Yankees burned it in '63. Pa tried to stop them. She swallowed hard. They shot him where he stood. Ma didn't make it through the next winter. I ended up drifting. Met a man who promised me work. His work was collecting women. Her eyes darkened. By the time I understood, it was too late. Caleb clenched his jaw. The rain hammered louder, like the sky itself raged for her. He wanted to ask more, but saw the tremor in her hands. Enough had been spoken for one night. "I'll ride into Redstone tomorrow," he said instead. "Need medicine, some cloth for a proper dress." Her head snapped up. "No, you can't. Someone might know me. They won't. Your hair's different now. New clothes. Redstone's 20 miles. No one will expect to see you there." "You don't understand," she whispered. "These men have ties everywhere. Debtors, cowards, folks too afraid to stand up. They offer rewards for runaways. Then we'll be careful." He reached across and covered her hand with his own. Her skin was cold, as though fear itself had seeped into her bones. "You can't hide in this cabin forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to step back into the world." Her gaze fixed on his hand. "Why are you really doing this?" "What do you want from me?" Caleb exhaled, the question heavy. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel like there's no place left. After the war, when I came back to Highwind Prairie, everything looked the same but felt hollow, like I was a ghost in my own life. Maybe helping you reminds me I'm still alive, too." He turned her palm upward, tracing the calluses earned from farm work, the thin scars etched by hardship. "Maybe we both need to remember what it feels like to live." Her eyes welled, but she didn't pull away. "I don't know how anymore. All I feel is fear and anger. We'll figure it out together," he said. That night, Caleb laid his blankets by the fire. He listened to the rain and the steady breath of Lydia Mae across the room. Sometime, deep into the night, a small cry broke the stillness. He bolted upright. She sat on the bed, rigid, eyes open but trapped in some nightmare. "Lydia," he said gently, "you're safe. It's just a dream." Her gaze met his, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I was back there. I could hear them, smell the smoke. Part of me feels like I'll never escape." Caleb rose and moved to the window. Beyond the glass, the prairie lay drowned in darkness and rain. He set his hand against the frame, feeling the cool seep through the wood. He wanted to promise her freedom, safety, peace. But promises were fragile things, and men like those she had fled would not give up easy. Still, as the storm howled, he knew one thing for certain: whatever came hunting for her would find him first. Caleb woke to the clean silence that follows a hard rain. The storm had blown itself out sometime before dawn, and sunlight now poured through the small window, bright enough to turn the wet world into a field of glitter. He sat up from his pallet near the hearth and looked across the room. Lydia Mae stood at the door with one hand on the latch, breathing slow and deep as if she were drawing courage from the morning itself. "I used to dream about the fighting every night," he said. "The shots, the smoke. I saw my brother fall again and again. Thunder sounded like cannon. In time, the dreams eased. The real world got louder than the echo." "Do you believe that?" she asked. "I'm beginning to," he said. She stepped out onto the stoop. The air smelled of cedar and wet grass and turned earth. Sounds carried clear as a bell. A jay fussed from the live oak, far off. The creek talked to itself as it tumbled over stone. "Smells like things growing," she said. "Spring has its own voice." "Give it a few weeks," he told her, joining her in the doorway. "The prairies will be blue with flowers. You will swear someone unrolled a carpet across the high wind. My pa used to say spring is the way God reminds folks that nothing stays broken forever," she said. There was softness in her voice that he had not heard before. He studied her profile. The new cut of her hair framed her face. The bruise at the corner of her mouth had faded to a faint shadow. She still looked too thin, but there was a new line to her chin, set and steady. "Maybe we could ride to Redstone," she said, "if you still want to." "You sure?" he asked. "No," she said, and for the first time since he found her at Clearwater Creek, she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "But I am tired of hiding. If I'm going to live in this world again, I need to take a step." They set about getting ready. Lydia washed at the basin until her face and hands were pink from scrubbing. She pulled on his extra shirt and an old pair of trousers he had cinched with rope, then shrugged into a coat that hid the shape of her. She braided her hair with careful fingers and settled a wide hat low over her eyes. The clothes made her look small, almost boyish, but she stood straighter than she had before. "Ready?" Caleb asked, checking the rifle before hitching it to the saddle. "Ready as I will ever be," she said, and if her hand shook when she adjusted the hat, only he saw it. They left the safety of the hidden valley and followed deer paths through stands of shin oak and cedar until the trails widened to a wagon track. The storm had washed the air clean, and the ground held the prints of everything that had passed in the night. Coyote, deer, a stray cow that had cut across the road. The sky was an open blue bowl, deep enough to fall into. Redstone lay in a fold of limestone hills. A scatter of weathered buildings gathered around a single muddy street. A livery, a saloon with shuttered windows, a blacksmith with his anvil on a stump in the yard, a church whose bell rope hung down the side like a tail. The general store sat in the center of it all with its porch full of crates and a cat asleep in a patch of sun. Caleb felt Lydia tense behind him as they rode in. Her hands gripped his belt tight. He had given her the coat and the hat to hide in plain sight. But fear burned off a person like heat, and he could feel it from her now. "Easy," he said. "We will be quick. We will be careful." Inside the store, The air held the mixed smells of leather, kerosene, coffee, and pickles. Shelves climbed the walls, stacked with bolts of fabric and sacks of flour, tins of salve, boxes of ammunition, coils of rope, and rows of mason jars filled with bright candies that seemed almost too hopeful for such a place. "Mornin', Caleb," said Mrs. Henderson from behind the counter. She was a sturdy woman with clear eyes and a ledger book under her hand. "What can I get for you?" "Medicine," he said. "Iodine, bandages, a bit of thread and needle, coffee, flour, salt, and if you have it, cloth for sewing, Mrs." Henderson's glance slid past him to Lydia, who stood near the door like a colt ready to bolt. Something in the woman's face softened. She nodded and began to move, quick and efficient, stacking the requested items on the counter. "We have good calico in the back," she said, lifting out a stack of bolts, blue, red corn flour, a nice clean cotton. The blue would suit. Lydia stepped forward before she seemed to know she had moved. Her hand brushed the blue cotton printed with tiny white flowers. "May I?" she asked. "Of course," Mrs. Henderson said. "Pretty choice. We'll bring out your eyes." As the woman measured and cut, Caleb added coffee and flour to the pile. The ordinary act of buying what they needed seemed to smooth the air around Lydia. She drifted to a tray of ribbons, touched one, then drew back her hand as if the price of wanting anything might fall too dear. They were loading the purchases into the saddlebags when a voice slurred across the street. "Well, I will be." Caleb turned. A tall man wove on his feet outside the saloon. His hair was greasy, his coat stained, his boots scuffed to the color of dirt. He squinted into the sun, then grinned in a way that showed more yellow than tooth. "Thought I knew that walk," he said. "Come here, girl. Let me see you better." Lydia went still beside him. Caleb stepped so that he stood squarely between the man and the girl. "You have business with us, friend?" "Might do," the man said, working his jaw like he was tasting his own words. "Depends if that filly has a mark that would fetch fine money to the right buyer." "Do not know what you're talking about," Caleb said. "Sure you do," the man said, his grin widening. "Word is out on some missing goods that walked away. Owners want them back. Cash on the barrel for anyone who points the way." Doors eased open up and down the street. 2 men drifted out of the saloon, blinking into the light. The blacksmith leaned his hammer on his thigh and watched. Mrs. Henderson stood in her doorway with worry tightening the corners of her mouth. "You're drunk," Caleb said. "Go sleep it off." "Maybe so," the man said, "but I have eyes. That one has the look, skittish and scared, trying to hide." He tipped his chin at Lydia. "Why not show us that pretty leg, sweetheart? Let us see what is burned there." The words hit like a slap. Caleb felt Lydia sway. All the small courage she had gathered to step into this town threatened to drain away at once. "That is enough," Caleb said, voice flat. The drunk took a step closer, encouraged by the eyes gathering. "Come on, darling. Just a quick look. If you're not what I think, we will let you be. If you are, there's a reward waiting and men who will be mighty grateful." The word reward moved through the crowd like a scent. Some faces hardened with disapproval, but others sharpened with interest. Redstone was a poor town. Money pressed men into shapes they would not choose on a full belly. "Last warning," Caleb said. "Or what?" The man laughed. "You will shoot me over a used-up girl, plenty more where she came from." Caleb's fist landed before the man could finish. Years of drilling had taught him to strike clean, knuckles to jaw, all shoulder behind it. The drunk dropped like a sack and hit the street hard. For a long breath, Redstone held still. Somewhere a dog barked. Then voices broke out, brittle and quick. "Come on," Caleb said to Lydia. "We're leaving." They took 2 steps, and a man from the saloon called out, "Hold now. Maybe the drunk is a fool, but what if he is right? What if she has escaped property? There could be money in this." Another voice followed. "Law is law. Theft is theft." Caleb felt the mood turn. He lifted Lydia into the saddle and swung up behind her, keeping his hand near the holster. "Nobody needs to do anything they will regret," he said. "We are passing through." "Maybe you are," said the blacksmith, stepping forward with his hammer in his hand. "Maybe we send word to the sheriff and let him sort it." "What sheriff?" Caleb asked. "Your sheriff has been dead 6 months. Then maybe we handle it ourselves," the blacksmith said. "If the girl is stolen goods, the Christian thing is to return her." "Look at her," Caleb said. "Look with your own eyes. Does she look like a thing to be bought and sold?" Some shifted their feet. Some looked away. A few hardened. A gray bearded rancher Caleb recognized from a distance stepped into the street. Samuel Cross, a man known to weigh before he judged. "We are not talking right and wrong," Cross said, voice even. "We are talking about returning what belongs to someone else. If money was laid down, it has value. Taking it is stealing. She belongs to herself," Caleb said. "You do." "I do." "A noble thought," Cross said, "but it does not change the facts if papers exist." From the dirt, the drunk pushed up on an elbow, face swollen. "Do not let them ride," he croaked. "That is a marked woman. I would stake my life on it. Someone check her leg." The crowd tightened. The space to leave shrank. Caleb drew his pistol and leveled it low. "Step back," he said. "All of you. Guns change the angle of any conversation." Some men paused, hands going up, not all. The blacksmith hefted his hammer. Another man slid his hand along the stock of a rifle. "Do not make this worse," Cross said. "We are reasonable. We will be fair." Caleb kept the muzzle steady. "I have seen what reasonable men do when they decide a person is property." Behind him, Lydia whispered, "Leave me. Save yourself." "Not happening," he said. They edged the horse toward the edge of town. The street did not give. The drunk found his feet and called after them, voice raw with anger. "Run if you like. Word will go out. The man who owns that stockyard has long arms. He will send a badge to fetch her. You cannot hide stolen goods forever." The name was not spoken yet, but the threat of a false law with purchased authority hung in the air. Caleb's gut went cold. He had heard talk in camp about a man who profited from ruin, who wrapped wickedness in paper and seal. If that was the force behind this crowd, then trouble would not stop at the edge of Redstone. He put his heel to the mare. The path out of town opened by inches, not yards. Faces watched from porches. Some were pinched with hunger. Some were ashamed. A few met his eyes with a look that said they would rather do right than easy if someone showed them how. They cleared the last building and took the bend in the road at a steady trot that wanted to be a run. Lydia did not look back. Her hands were iron around him. Only when Redstone dropped behind a rocky rise did she let out the breath she had been holding since the drunk had spoken. "I am sorry," she said. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said, but his mind had already begun to reckon. If talk carried as fast as it often did, men would be riding by nightfall, not bounty boys chasing a rumor, but professional hands paid to finish a job. They would need supplies and a plan and a way to fight on ground of their choosing. He settled her deeper in the saddle and turned Ruth toward the narrow trails that hid their sign. The sun was high and bright on the wet stone. A hawk rode the wind above the high-wind prairie. Somewhere beyond the horizon, trouble had been given their names. Caleb kept his eyes forward and his jaw set. They had stepped into the world. Now the world would come back at them. He would be ready to meet it. Caleb had seen plenty of men like the ones gathering in Redstone's main street, men hardened by hunger, failure, or plain greed. When the promise of quick money dangled in front of them, reason had a way of slipping away. He eased Lydia Mae onto their horse and climbed up behind her, his palm never straying far from the revolver at his side. "No need for foolishness," he told the crowd, his voice steady. "We are just moving along." The blacksmith, a wide-shouldered man with arms like oak beams, stepped forward with his hammer still in hand. "Maybe so, but maybe it is best we call the law and let them handle it proper." Caleb's gaze did not flinch. "What law? You all know the sheriff has been dead near half a year. Then maybe it falls on us." The blacksmith shot back. "If that girl is stolen property, the right thing is to return her, a Christian duty." Behind Caleb, Lydia Mae gave a small cry, something between a sob and a gasp. He could feel her trembling against his back. "Take a good look at her," Caleb said, raising his voice so all could hear. "Does she look like cattle, like something to be traded or branded? Does she look like property to you?" A few men shifted their boots uneasily, eyes sliding away, but the blacksmith would not yield. Looks do not matter. The law is the law. Theft is still theft. Caleb's tone turned iron hard. Whose law? The one that marks women like beasts. The one that says human souls can be bought and sold. That the law you all want to stand behind for a moment. The crowd faltered. Silence carried down the dusty street. Then Samuel Hartwell, an older rancher with gray whiskers, pushed forward. "Caleb," Hartwell said in his even voice, "this is not about right or wrong. It is about returning something to the men who paid for it. If money was invested, if she belongs on their ledger, then taking her is theft. That is the truth of it. She belongs to no one but herself." Caleb shot back, "Same as you, same as me. That is a fine notion," Hartwell replied, shaking his head, "but it does not change what men with coin believe. If she is worth money to them, that worth belongs to the one who purchased it." The drunk Caleb had knocked down began stirring, clutching his jaw. His face twisted with anger as he yelled, "Do not let them leave. That is a marked woman. I swear it on my life. Check her leg. You will see what was burned into her." The crowd edged closer, tension thickening like storm clouds. Caleb knew he could take a few men, maybe even hold them for a time, but not an entire town. And if he tried, word would spread. Bounty men would come hunting. Lydia Mae would never be safe again. He drew his pistol in a slow, deliberate motion. "Step back. All of you." Some faces paled at the sight of steel, but not all. The blacksmith lifted his hammer as though ready for war. Samuel Hartwell rested his palm near the rifle on his shoulder. "Do not make this worse than it has to be. Son," Hartwell said, "we are reasonable men. We will see she is treated fairly while we sort the matter out." "Fair," Caleb said bitterly. I have seen how reasonable men treat women they call property. He backed the horse toward the edge of town, keeping his weapon steady. Lydia Mae's whisper came soft at his ear. "Leave me. Save yourself." "Not a chance," he answered, not looking back. They had nearly cleared the last buildings when the drunk shouted one more time, "Run all you want. Word is already out. Jonah Blackwell has men everywhere. He will hunt you down. You cannot hide stolen goods forever." The name struck Caleb like a hammer blow. Blackwell. He had heard it in soldier camps, always said with a mix of disgust and dread. A man who turned war into business, who built his fortune on misery and ruin. Caleb dug in his heels and spurred the horse forward, guiding them into narrow deer trails and shallow creeks that would cover their tracks. The roar of the crowd faded behind them, replaced by the steady rush of water and the sharp beat of hooves. He felt Lydia Mae's tears soaking through his shirt as they rode. The fragile hope she had begun to reclaim over the past days crumbled under the weight of that name. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have brought this on you." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Caleb told her, though his thoughts were already racing. Supplies, weapons, a place they could make a stand. Jonah Blackwell would not give up, and if they were to survive, he needed to know what kind of power the man commanded. By the time they reached the shelter of the high-wind prairie, Caleb had made a vow. Whatever came, Lydia Mae would never again wear the scar of another man's brand, even if it cost him his life. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. Caleb kept constant watch from the cabin's single window, rifle always at hand. Lydia Mae barely spoke, her spirit dulled again by despair. The blue cloth she had chosen in the store lay untouched on the table, mocking the fragile dreams it once carried. On the 4th morning, Caleb rose with a decision burning in his mind. "I need to go back," he said, checking his revolver for the 3rd time. Lydia Mae looked up from mending his shirt. "Back where redstone," he said. "I need to know what we are facing, who Blackwell really is, what kind of men he keeps near him. Information is the only advantage we have." "It is too dangerous," she said, fear edging her words. "What if someone knows you? What if they are waiting? Then I will find that out, too." He crouched beside her chair and took her hands in his. They were small, calloused from work that should never have fallen on someone so young. "I cannot protect you if I do not know what is coming." Her grip tightened. "What if you do not come back?" Caleb studied her face, the sharp lines of her cheekbones, the blue eyes holding more pain than 19 years should allow. "I will come back," he promised. The ride to Redstone felt longer than before. Every sound in the brush carried suspicion. Every figure in the distance looked like a spy. But the town lay quiet under the heat of afternoon, dust drifting through its single street. Only a few horses stood tied outside the saloon. Caleb stabled his mount and walked toward the general store, every sense alert. Mrs. Whitfield greeted him with polite reserve, though her eyes flicked nervously to the door as if expecting trouble. "Did not think you would return so soon," she said. "Forgot to buy coffee," he answered, lifting a small bag from the shelf. As she counted his change, Mrs. Whitfield leaned closer and lowered her voice. "I do not know what you and that girl are tangled up in, Caleb, but men have been asking questions. Not the usual drifters either. Men who look trained, sharp, professional." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions about strangers coming through?" about a young woman with auburn hair. She darted a glance toward the saloon. One of them is in there now, buying drinks and talking, claims he is a lawman. She shrugged, but a badge can be bought just like anything else. Caleb left Mrs. Whitfield's store and paused on the boardwalk, his mind running through possibilities. A false lawman meant Blackwell had more reach than he had feared. The man was clever, disguising his hunters behind a mask of legitimacy. That made him more dangerous than any drunken bounty seeker. The saloon across the street was dim when Caleb stepped inside. Smoke hung thick as fog, heavy with the smell of cheap whiskey, sweat, and bodies that had not seen soap in too long. A dozen men scattered across rough tables drank and played cards, their voices a low rumble. At the polished bar stood a figure who immediately drew Caleb's attention. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat cut from fabric finer than anything Redstone usually saw. His boots gleamed with polish, and a silver star glimmered on his vest. But everything else about him rang false, too refined, too expensive. When the man turned, Caleb saw eyes like chips of ice, sharp, calculating, cold. Jonah Blackwell. Caleb ordered a whiskey and slid into a table near the wall where shadows clung, just close enough to listen. Blackwell's voice carried easily, smooth and confident, the kind of tone politicians used when they wanted people to believe in their authority. "Gentlemen, we all know what the war left behind," Blackwell was saying, raising his glass. "Chaos. Men taking what isn't theirs. Women forgetting their place in decent society. I have seen it firsthand. Just last week I was forced to track down a young woman who let herself be led astray by criminal influences. What sort of influences, asked a man near the bar. The worst kind," Blackwell said, his voice thick with righteous scorn. "Men who prey upon the weak, who whisper lies about freedom and independence into young ears." This particular woman had been lawfully bound to work off her family's debts. Instead of fulfilling her duty, she allowed herself to be seduced by false promises of escape. Caleb's jaw locked tight. He knew exactly who Blackwell was speaking of. Lydia Mae, reduced to nothing but a runaway debtor in his tail. "Any of you folks spotted a girl like that?" Blackwell asked, scanning the room. Auburn hair, blue eyes, barely 19. She's traveling with a man who doesn't understand the law or the obligations that bind her. From a table in the corner came a rasping voice. Caleb recognized it instantly, the drunk whose jaw he had broken days earlier. The man's face was still swollen, his words slurred but eager. "Sure did. Saw her with a fellow called Caleb Ward." Blackwell's eyes sharpened like a hawk sighting a rabbit. "Caleb Ward, you say, tell me more." The drunk launched into a rambling account of their encounter, eager for attention. Caleb studied Blackwell as he listened. There was calculation in every line of his face, but also satisfaction, as though the man enjoyed drawing the noose tighter. "This Ward," Blackwell said thoughtfully. "Does he own land around here, a place where he might hide a fugitive? Got a cabin up in the hills? Another local offered. Keeps to himself. War veteran, I reckon." Blackwell nodded as though the pieces fit perfectly. Another broken soul from the conflict. Men like that often lose respect for order. No doubt the war confused his notions of duty. "Gentlemen, I am prepared to offer payment for help in recovering this lost property." He raised his voice so the whole saloon heard. $50 for good intelligence, $200 for her return. The numbers stirred the room like a thrown stone in a pond. Murmurs rose as men calculated what that kind of money could mean. $200 was more than most families saw in months. This is not vengeance, Blackwell continued smoothly. This is about law and order. The girl owes a legal debt. She must complete her obligation. Contracts are what keep our society from unraveling. What happens once she's found? Asked a voice in the back. Blackwell's smile was thin as a blade. She will be returned to her rightful place. She'll finish what she owes. As for the man who aided her escape, well, theft is theft, and theft carries its own punishment. Caleb drained his whiskey and rose, careful not to draw attention. He was almost to the door when Blackwell's voice cut across the room. "You there. You're new in town." Caleb turned slowly, face calm, just passing through. Blackwell studied him with those winter eyes, noting the soldier's posture, the worn coat, the hand that hovered near a gun. "You have the look of a soldier. Which side did you serve Union?" Caleb answered, his voice flat. "Ah, a fellow veteran." Blackwell's smile spread, though it never touched his eyes. "Then you understand what war teaches us. Duty, following orders even when they cut deep. Civilization demands structure, rules. Debts paid, depends on the rules," Caleb replied evenly. "Some orders aren't worth following." The room chilled. Laughter and card games faded to silence. Blackwell's smile withered, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. "Interesting," he murmured. "Tell me, friend, what's your name?" For a moment, Caleb considered lying, but instinct told him Blackwell already knew. Caleb Ward. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Blackwell's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. So, Caleb Ward. The same man seen here days ago with the girl I seek. "Don't know what you mean," Caleb said. "Of course you don't." Blackwell drew a silver watch from his vest and checked the time with deliberate ease. "Funny, isn't it, men thinking they are saving a woman from some terrible fate, when in truth they are committing theft?" Caleb's hand drifted closer to his revolver, though his face remained still. "The girl you shelter is legally bound," Blackwell went on. "Bought and paid for by proper contracts. To hide her is to steal. To refuse her return is to double that crime." "Strange law," Caleb said. "Strange law that lets men own women like livestock. The law is the law, regardless of your feelings," Blackwell replied with the patience of a teacher addressing a stubborn child. "But I am a reasonable man, Mr. Ward. Hand her over, and this can all be forgotten. And if I don't, then I will have no choice but to use my authority as a duly appointed officer of the peace. Theft of valuable property is punishable, sometimes by prison, sometimes worse." The saloon was deathly quiet. Every man waited for Caleb's next word. "That tin star on your vest," Caleb asked, "where did you buy it?" Blackwell's eyes flickered. "I am a lawful sheriff with full authority." "In what territory?" Caleb pressed. For the first time, a crack showed in Blackwell's calm. His jaw tightened. "I think we are finished here. Mr. Ward, you have 24 hours to reconsider my generous offer. After that, well, after that I will act." Caleb backed toward the door, pistol ready at his side. "You know where to find me." "Indeed I do," Blackwell said smoothly, turning back to the bar. "Indeed I do." The saloon came alive with whispers as Caleb stepped into the harsh sunlight. He heard Blackwell's voice booming again inside, spinning his version of law and order, warning of men who placed personal feeling above society's contracts. Caleb did not wait to hear more. He untied his horse and rode out of town, every hoofbeat pounding home the truth. Jonah Blackwell knew his name, he knew about the cabin, and he would not rest until Lydia Mae was back under his thumb. Caleb leaned low in the saddle, urging his horse faster toward the quiet shelter of the high-wind prairie. The war was over, but another kind of battle had just begun. Caleb rode hard with his thoughts pounding as loud as his horse's hooves. What he had heard in Redstone made the shape of their enemy plain. Jonah Blackwell was not a mere bounty hound or a lazy badge. He was worse, a man who wrapped chains in paper and called it law, a man who turned debt into a cage so neat that decent people might nod along while it closed. By the time the sun dropped behind the limestone hills and bled the sky red, Caleb knew their hiding time was finished. Blackwell would come. He would bring a show of authority to make cowards feel brave and greedy men feel moral. The only question left was whether Caleb and Lydia Mae would be ready when that show arrived at their door. He reached the cabin at first starlight. His horse was lathered shoulder to flank, and his own shirt clung to his back. Lydia Mae stepped into the doorway before he could swing down, her face pale in the dusk. "What did you learn?" she asked, moving to take the reins and the weight of the saddle. "More than I wanted," he said. He led the mare to the small corral and worked the cinch loose with stiff hands. Blackwell is in Redstone. He wears a star that does not belong to him and speaks like a judge. He knows about the cabin. Her hands stilled on the blanket. "You saw him. You spoke to him. He knows we are here," Caleb said, meeting her eyes so there would be no lie between them. "He gave us a day to surrender you. Then that is what we will do," she said, and her voice was level, though fear sat right behind it. "I will not have you killed for me." "Nobody is surrendering anybody," Caleb said. He hung the blanket on the fence rail and straightened. "We always knew this might come. Now we decide how to meet it." They spent the evening turning a quiet home into a place that could stand a fight. Caleb cleaned his rifle and revolver until the metal shone in lamplight. He counted cartridges and checked the shutters and the braces on both doors. Lydia Mae melted lead for bullets, hands steady over the iron ladle. She tore the blue cloth from the store into strips for bandages, the little flowers on the fabric looking strange and brave against the table boards. "How many will he send?" she asked at last. "Hard to say." Caleb answered as he thumbed shells into the rifle tube. The clicks sounded loud in the small room. 3 or 4 at first. Maybe more if he wants to make a point. The only question is whether they try to take you alive or decide to teach by example. Lydia Mae's fingers kept moving, tearing cloth into neat lengths. "At that place," she said after a long moment, "when women tried to run and were dragged back, they made us watch. They said it was to stop rebellion. I think Blackwell liked it." Cold settled in Caleb's chest, clean and sharp. "He will not touch you again," he said. "That is a promise." "You cannot promise that," she said. "You are one man. He has money and men." "Maybe I am only one man," Caleb said, "but I have something worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge they had not dared to step onto. Lydia Mae looked up from the strips of blue cloth and met his eyes. She started to speak, and then the night itself seemed to lean in. Horses, faint at first, then clearer. Hoofbeats on the rocky trail that led to the cabin. "Too soon," Caleb muttered, snuffing the lamp and moving to the window slit. He said we had a day. He peered into the dark and made out 3 riders easing up the path. the way men ride when they are sure of their destination. He could hear low voices passing like coins among them. "Back room," he whispered. "Bar the door. Do not come out no matter what you hear. I am not leaving you to stand alone," she said. "You are, if you want me to have a chance." He pressed his spare pistol into her hand. "If they get past me, use it. Do not let them take you alive." For a heartbeat, the mask she had learned to wear slid aside and he saw the scared girl beneath the grit. He touched his lips to her forehead quick and light. "I will come back," he said. The riders stopped just beyond the reach of the window glow. Caleb slid behind the overturned table he had dragged into place and rested the rifle along the edge. He listened to the whispers outside and the soft tick of the cooling stove. Caleb Ward. A voice called. It was not Blackwell. It was younger, a touch too proud, the kind of voice that likes the sound of its own orders. "We know you are inside. Come out and we can talk like civilized men." Caleb stayed silent. Civilized men did not visit in the dark. Civilized men came under the sun. "We are not here to hurt anyone." The voice lied. "We just want to talk." A shadow shifted near the front window, a head ducking to peer through the glass. Caleb eased the rifle's sights to meet it and waited for the moment when waiting turned into losing. "Maybe he is gone," another voice said. "Maybe they ran." "The horse is in the corral," the first voice answered. "They are here, likely got the runaway in with him. So what is the play? Wade. We going in? Wade." Caleb filed the name away. Local by the sound of him. Young by the rhythm of his words. A boy who wanted to turn another person's pain into reward. "Blackwell wants them alive if it is clean," Wade said, "but if they resist—" The rest got swallowed by the shuffle of boots as the three men spread around the cabin. Caleb heard a man climb onto the roof, the scratch of heel on wood and the soft thud near the chimney. Another set of steps circled toward the back. The first strike came sharp and fast. A window burst inward under a rock bundled in cloth. A burning brand followed and caught the curtains. At the same heartbeat, both doors shuddered under kicks. Caleb fired through the front door. A curse barked from outside and a body thumped the porch. The back door held a breath longer before it blew, and a stocky man shouldered through with a shotgun. Caleb rolled as the blast chewed the wall where his chest had been. He came up on one knee and returned a shot that caught the man high in the shoulder and spun him back into the threshold. From the roof came a scuffle. Then the sound of a man dropping into the chimney and finding the banked coals with his backside. The curses that followed were loud enough to be a map. Smoke and the raw stink of singed hair poured into the room. Caleb lunged toward the bedroom to cut off any charge in that direction, but a figure snapped into the broken front window, pistol leveled. "There he is." Wade shouted and fired. The impact slammed Caleb into the wall and lit a fire along his ribs. He felt the floor tilt under him and forced his vision to hold steady. He squeezed a shot in reply. Wade ducked and vanished from the broken pane. The man who had come down the chimney dragged himself from the hearth, clothes smoking, face black with soot and fury. He had a rifle gripped tight and was hunting shapes through the haze. Caleb reached for his fallen gun, and a second shot tore across his shoulder and sent him sprawling. Hot blood poured down his arm. The world narrowed to the table edge and the hard rhythm of his own breath. The gunfire stopped as if someone had cut a string. Only the crackle of flame and the hiss of the stove filled the silence. Through the smoke, Wade stepped into view. Pistol trained center on Caleb's chest. He was breathing hard and wearing a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Well now," Wade said, "the famous Caleb Ward. Not much to look at after all. Boys." The shotgun man stumbled back into the doorway with his wounded shoulder, trying to bring the barrel around for another shot. The chimney man, face streaked with soot, lifted his rifle to finish the work. Both flanked Wade, confident now that the cabin was theirs. Caleb's side burned hot and his shoulder had gone numb, but he lifted his head enough to see past the table. The bedroom door stood closed and barred the way he had told Lydia Mae to keep it. If they reached that door, if they pried it open, if they dragged her out into the smoke and heat, then everything he had promised would be ash. Wade saw his glance and smiled wider. "Where is the girl?" he asked in a voice that wanted to be easy and came out greedy. "You hand her over and maybe you get to breathe a while longer." Caleb kept his mouth shut. He needed his breath for what might come next. "Search the room," Wade told the others without taking his eyes off Caleb. "She is here." The chimney man moved toward the back, and the shotgunner lurched a step in the same direction. Wade shifted with them, keeping his pistol steady, and for the span of 2 heartbeats his body screened the others from a clean line to the bedroom. It was not enough. It was all Caleb had. He shoved off the floor, teeth clenched against the pane, and dove for the revolver he had dropped when the second shot tore his shoulder. His hand closed on the grip, and he rolled as the shotgun barked again. Buckshot chewed splinters from the door frame inches from the bedroom latch. Wade swore and fired. The ball sang past Caleb's ear and smacked the stone of the hearth. Caleb answered with 2 fast shots that forced Wade sideways and drove the chimney man to cover behind the table. The shotgunner stumbled to reload with shaking hands and blood slicking his sleeve. Smoke thickened until it stung the eyes and turned the room into a gray maze. Heat licked the curtains and crawled along the ceiling beams. Somewhere beyond the door, Lydia Mae stood in the dark with a pistol and a promise, and Caleb felt the shape of that promise steady his own hands. Last chance. Wade called, voice roughening, "Give up the girl." Caleb drew a breath that tasted of ash. "Come take her," he said. The men glanced at one another. Greed warred with the memory of burning coals and bullets that came from nowhere. Wade's jaw bunched. He pointed with his pistol toward the back. The chimney man nodded and ducked low, trying for the bedroom again. The shotgunner planted his feet and brought his weapon up for a rush. Caleb braced against the table, vision tunneling, and lined the sights where the next man would break from cover. His ribs throbbed and his shoulder blazed, and still he found the calm he had learned on battle lines when noise and death pressed close. He thought of Lydia Mae's hands tearing cloth into neat strips. He thought of her chin set when she chose the blue bolt with little white flowers. He thought of the way her voice had found steadiness again on that sunny stoop after the storm. The chimney man moved first, and Caleb squeezed the trigger. The man with the shotgun clutched his wounded shoulder, while the one who had tumbled through the chimney still wore the soot of the hearth across his face. Both of them looked ragged, but they were standing, while Caleb Ward lay bleeding on the planks. Wade, the young gunman with too much swagger for his own good, stood over him with pistol ready. "Where's the girl?" Wade demanded. His voice carried the arrogance of someone who thought the fight was already won. Caleb said nothing, saving his breath and what strength he had left. His gaze flicked once toward the bedroom door. It was still closed, barred from the inside just as he had told her. Maybe Lydia Mae would have the sense to slip out the window, take the mare, and ride for her life. Wade crouched closer, his boot lashing out to catch Caleb hard in the ribs. Pain ripped through his side, black spots flooding his vision. "Go to hell," Caleb rasped. Wade laughed, big words from a man bleeding out on his own floor. He jerked his chin toward his partner's. "Search the place. She's here." The shotgunner moved stiffly toward the bedroom. The soot-streaked man followed, rifle half raised. From inside the room came the sound Caleb had dreaded, the scrape of wood as the bar was lifted. "No," Caleb thought desperately. "Stay hidden. Run." But the door swung open and Lydia Mae stepped out, both hands locked around the pistol he had given her. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Leave him alone." Wade turned with a wolf's grin. "There she is, the prize herself. You led us quite a chase, darling." I said, "Leave him alone." She kept the gun leveled at Wade's chest. "You want me, here I am. Take me and go." "Oh, we'll take you," Wade said, his eyes running over her. "But first, we deal with your friend here. Can't have folks thinking they can cross Jonah Blackwell and live." Caleb tried to push himself upright, tried to bring his hands toward any weapon, but his body would not obey. His blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage, and weakness pressed him back down. "Please," Lydia Mae said, her control slipping now. "He only tried to help me. This isn't his fight." "Sure it is," Wade sneered. "Became his fight the moment he decided to steal property from Mr. Blackwell." He raised his pistol toward Caleb's head. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll make it quick." The shot that cracked through the smoke-filled cabin was not from Wade's weapon. Lydia Mae's bullet struck him high in the chest, spinning him off his feet and slamming him into the wall. He slid down, leaving a dark smear on the timber before going still. For a heartbeat, the cabin fell silent. Then chaos. The shotgunner yanked his weapon up. The soot-covered man swung his rifle toward Lydia Mae. She fired again, the bullet sparking off the doorframe as buckshot tore splinters from the wood where she had stood a moment earlier. She dove aside, hair whipping as she rolled. Caleb forced himself forward, every muscle screaming, and clawed Wade's pistol from the floor. He managed to aim through blurred vision just as the rifleman steadied his sights on Lydia Mae. Caleb squeezed the trigger. The man jerked, stumbled, and dropped without a word. The shotgunner's courage faltered. With both his companions down, he bolted for the door, stumbling into the night. Lydia Mae let him go. She rushed instead to Caleb, dropping to her knees beside him. How bad, she asked, hands moving quickly to check the wounds. "Bad enough," Caleb admitted, voice rasping as blood filled his mouth. "But I'll live. Question is, what do we do now?" Outside, the fading sound of hooves told them the survivor was racing for redstone. Word of the failed raid would reach Jonah Blackwell before dawn. More men would come better armed, angrier, and under orders that left no chance for mercy. "We run," Lydia Mae said firmly, sliding an arm under Caleb's shoulders. "We patch you up and ride as far and as fast as we can." Caleb leaned heavily on her as they staggered toward the corral. "Can't run forever." "Then we run until we can't anymore," she snapped. "But we don't give up. We don't let him win." He looked at her then, really looked, through the haze of pain. In her voice was a steel he hadn't heard before, a fierceness born not of fear but of resolve. He let that strength carry him as she boosted him into the saddle and swung up behind, guiding the horse into the dark. They made it barely 2 miles before Caleb sagged forward, his body given out. Lydia Mae caught him before he fell and managed to steer their mount into a stand of live oaks where a spring bubbled from limestone. She eased him down, her heart hammering at the blood soaking through every cloth she had wrapped around him. "Can't go much further," he mumbled, face gray as ash. She pressed a wet cloth to his side, fighting the panic rising in her chest. "We have to keep moving. That man will bring Blackwell with more guns." Caleb shook his head weakly, leaning against the trunk of an oak. "I'm no good to you like this. Leave me here. Take the horse." "No." The word cracked like a whip. "I'm not leaving you. Caleb, you have a chance if you go now," he said, coughing until flecks of blood stained his lips. "They want you alive. Me. I'm nothing but an obstacle." She dipped the cloth in the cold spring again, washing the blood from his shoulder. "Maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I'm tired of letting others decide what happens to me." She met his eyes then, and he saw something fierce there, a strength he had only glimpsed before. "You said I was stronger than what they did to me. Maybe it's time I proved it." Before he could answer, the faint sound of horses drifted through the trees. Not one or two, but many. The flicker of torchlight soon danced among the trunks, glowing like fireflies in the pre-dawn dark. "They're here," Lydia Mae whispered. Caleb counted at least 6 lights. Jonah Blackwell hadn't sent farm boys this time. He had brought real force. "Listen," Caleb said, gripping her hand with what strength he had. "They'll want you alive. They'll try to use me against you. Don't let them. Whatever they threaten, don't give in. Don't say that." She begged, "Promise me." He pressed, his hand trembling but his gaze steady. "If you surrender because of me, then everything we've fought for is lost." Her throat worked as she forced the word out. "I promise." The clearing brightened as torches closed in. Shadows became men with rifles, hard-faced and sure of themselves. Jonah Blackwell stepped into the light, boots spotless despite the rough trail, his coat pressed and star-gleaming on his chest. His eyes swept over the scene and rested on Caleb slumped against the oak. "Well, Mr. Ward," Blackwell said with false courtesy, "you look unwell. Perhaps you should have accepted my generous offer when you had the chance." Caleb tried to push himself upright, but the effort dropped him to his knees. Even so, he lifted his head, meeting the eyes of the man who had hunted them across the prairie. Lydia Mae's hand clenched tighter on his. She could feel the tremor of his body, the fight still in him even as blood loss dragged him down. And she knew with a clarity sharper than fear that this was only the beginning. The night air smelled of smoke and iron, and the men of Blackwell's company closed in, wolves circling wounded prey. 2 of Jonah Blackwell's hired guns raised their rifles, sights fixed on Caleb Ward as he struggled to remain upright. "And Miss Lydia Mae," Blackwell said, his cold eyes shifting toward her. "So good to see you again, though I must admit you've been nothing but trouble." Lydia Mae rose slowly, her hand hovering near the pistol at her belt, her chin lifted in defiance. "Stay back." Blackwell lifted a hand in mock reassurance. "No need for dramatics. You already know why I'm here, and you know what I want. I'm not going back to that place," she said. Her voice didn't shake, though her heart pounded. Blackwell chuckled softly, a predator humoring its prey. "My dear, you never truly left. Perhaps you escaped with your body, but on paper, you still belong to me until your debt is paid." His tone dripped with patronizing patience, like a teacher explaining a child's mistake. "She's not property," Caleb rasped from where he leaned against the oak. Each word sent a lance of pain through his chest. People aren't property. Blackwell's laugh was dry, brittle as winter leaves, spoken like a romantic. Tell me, soldier, what do you call it when someone takes what they can't afford to repay? When goods and services are consumed without restitution, civilization calls that debt, and debt, Mr. Ward, must be honored. By branding women like cattle, Lydia Mae's voice shook with fury. While locking them away and breaking them in the name of contracts, you signed papers, Blackwell countered, stepping closer as his men widened their circle. A legal commitment witnessed and recorded. I never signed anything. No, Blackwell said smoothly, reaching into his coat. Your mother did. He unfolded a document, his eyes gleaming. She signed over your service to cover her medical care and her burial. I paid the bills. Miss Mae, every cent. In exchange, I was promised your years of labor. Lydia Mae's face blanched. You're lying. Am I? He slid the paper back into his coat. Your mother was desperate, and desperation breeds agreement. She was grateful for my generosity. You are simply the unfortunate inheritor of her decision. Caleb saw Lydia Mae's spirit stagger under the weight of those words. Everything she had fought for her freedom, her right to her own life, was being twisted into a legal chain. Even if it's true, Caleb said, forcing the words past his teeth, debt doesn't justify what you did to her, or to any of those women. I gave them food, shelter, work, Blackwell replied, his tone still maddeningly calm. Life is harsh. At least with me, they survived. You branded her, Caleb shot back. I marked property as any rancher marks cattle, a practical measure. Blackwell's eyes glinted cruelly. And speaking of property, you've stolen from me. A serious crime, theft of assets, harboring a fugitive. These are hanging offenses in some courts. One of his men stepped forward, the muzzle of his rifle pressing against Caleb's temple. Want me to save the county a trial? Boss? Not yet. Samuel, Blackwell said, calling the man by name, Samuel Hartwell. Our Miss Mae needs to see what defiance costs. He turned back to her. Every day you remain free. Interest grows. And now, because of this little adventure, you also owe for the cost of pursuit. The men your companion killed, the horses, the ammunition. By my calculations, your debt has grown to around $3,000. At the standard rate, that's 15 years of service. The words hit Lydia Mae like a blow. 15 years. By the end, she'd be broken, discarded. Of course. Blackwell went on, I'm a fair man. Surrender willingly, and I'll reduce it to 10 years. He smiled, thin and sharp. Refuse, and Mr. Ward's survival becomes uncertain. Lydia Mae looked at Caleb. He was already pale, blood soaking through his bandages. He wouldn't last without a doctor, and even then it was doubtful. Blackwell knew it too. What guarantee do I have? She asked quietly. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. Guarantee that if I go with you, you'll let him live. You'll have my word as a gentleman. Your word isn't worth dust. Perhaps, he admitted with a shrug, but it's all you'll get. Decide quickly. He pulled his pocket watch, flicking it open. 1 minute. The clearing grew still. The only sound was Caleb's ragged breathing and the distant call of a mockingbird in the dawn. Lydia Mae's eyes swept the ring of rifles, then rested on Caleb's ashen face. 10 years, she thought. 10 years of hell. But he would live. Time's up, Blackwell announced. Samuel, if you would. Wait. Lydia Mae's voice sliced through the air. I'll go. No, Caleb whispered, reaching for her with trembling fingers. Lydia, don't. I said I'll go. Her voice rose stronger this time. But first, I want to say goodbye. Blackwell gave a gracious nod, a moment of sentiment. Very well. She knelt beside Caleb, her hand finding his. To the men, it looked like a tender farewell. But her lips brushed his ear, whispering words that widened his eyes. Trust me, she breathed. When I move, be ready. Before he could answer, she was on her feet again, her hand on the pistol at her belt. She fixed Blackwell with a blazing stare. You want your property back, she said. Come and take it. Her gun cleared leather in a blur. The crack of her shot split the dawn. Jonah Blackwell staggered as the bullet punched into his chest, spinning him back into the wildflowers. For a heartbeat, the world froze. His men faltered, torn between rage and training, between the order to take her alive and the instinct to kill her where she stood. That hesitation was all Caleb needed. Despite his wounds, he rolled behind a limestone outcrop, dragging Wade's fallen pistol with him. He fired twice, his shots cutting down the nearest rifleman before the others could react. The clearing erupted in chaos. Lydia Mae dove for the oak as rounds sliced the air, bark spitting against her cheek. Somewhere to her left, Jonah Blackwell was cursing, the words thin with pain. He was still alive, still dangerous, but his command was leaking out of him with every heartbeat. Take her alive, he shouted, and his men scattered into the trees. The half-light before dawn swallowed them, but the flashes gave them away. Caleb counted them in the brief sparks. 4, maybe 5. Too many for a wounded soldier and a woman with a handful of cartridges. Desperation was its own kind of edge. It steadied Lydia Mae's hands as she checked the cylinder. 3 left. She slid a breath in, slow, held it tight, and listened. When the shot cracked from the left, splintering the oak, she snapped one round back in that direction. A muffled oath answered her. Not clean, but it bought a slice of time. A tall man stepped from behind a cedar, rifle high, scar roped down his cheek. He moved like a professional. Samuel, Blackwell called. Finish this. The scarred man's eyes were flat as slate. Come on out, girl, Samuel called. Boss wants to talk. I've heard enough of his talk, Lydia Mae said, notching herself tighter to the trunk. You killed a lawman. That is a rope sentence. Even for a woman. He was no lawman, she said, just a thief with a rented badge. He laughed, harsh and humorless. Law is whatever the man with the most guns says it is. Today, that is us. Another shot snapped from the right. They were closing the ring, inch by inch, pressing her and Caleb toward the open spring. She risked a look back. Caleb's face had gone the color of old paper. His breaths were shallow. He tried to raise Wade's pistol, hands trembling, stubbornness the only thing keeping him upright. How many left? She whispered. Too many. He managed and tried to smile. Then we make the ones we have count. Samuel's voice rolled over the rock and brush. Last chance. Girl. Step out, and maybe your friend dies quick. Horses thundered through the timber. Samuel swung, startled. What in blazes? The answering rifle fire did not come from Blackwell's line. It lanced in from the dark behind the cedar belt. Deliberate and disciplined, cutting 2 of Blackwell's men off their feet. Riders burst through the trees, 6 at least, their faces hard and set. At their head came a rancher Lydia Mae recognized from Redstone. Samuel Hartwell. He had listened to Blackwell in the saloon with that still expression, every word going somewhere she could not see. Now his rifle was leveled and his men were fanning out. That is far enough. Blackwell. Hartwell called. This ends now. Blackwell, still on his knees, blinked through pain and shock. Hartwell. What do you think you're doing? Cleaning up a mistake, Hartwell said, swinging down from the saddle. One I should have cleaned up the day you rode into town with your pretty papers. You cannot be serious. You believed those documents. You believed the law. We are country folk, not fools, Hartwell said, spitting dust. Word rode in from Austin last night. You are wanted for trafficking, fraud, extortion, and half a ledger of sins besides. Samuel, the scarred lieutenant, gambled on speed. He whipped his rifle toward Lydia Mae, but Hartwell's shot caught him in the middle of the chest and planted him on his back. The last of Blackwell's men looked at the bodies, looked at the ring of riders, and let their weapons slump to the ground. Hands lifted, the fight went out like a blown lamp. Hartwell crossed the clearing to Blackwell, who knelt among crushed wildflowers, gray with blood loss and fury. You have no idea who I know, Blackwell rasped. You will be buried for this. Maybe, Hartwell said, but you are finished. He looked to Lydia Mae and then to Caleb, measuring their condition with an eye that had seen war. Ma'am, your man needs a doctor. My boy Jacob worked field tents under Grant. He can keep your fella breathing to redstone. Lydia Mae nodded, the motion small and unbelieving. A young rider slid to his knees beside Caleb, hands quick and gentle. Jacob, Hartwell said, see to him. Why? Lydia Mae asked, voice barely there. Why did you come? Hartwell tipped his hat back, fingers dragging through his graying hair. Because the truth got here faster than I feared and slower than I'd like. We heard what that place really was. Heard what he did to women. There are lines you do not cross if you expect to call yourself a man. Jacob worked with a quiet speed, washing blood with whiskey, packing wounds, knotting clean bandage. He lifted Caleb's eyelids, checked his pulse, and set his jaw. He is not out of the woods, ma'am, but he is not out of chances either. Hartwell crouched by Blackwell. Those papers you waved under our noses, where are they? Blackwell's hand twitched toward his coat. Hartwell fished out a folded packet and opened it in the new light. He studied the scrawl, then gave one short, satisfied nod. Forgeries. Good enough to fool a drunk or a desperate clerk. Not good enough now. He faced Lydia Mae. Your mother never signed away your life. You are free, not just by wish or feeling, by the law Blackwell likes to hide behind. The word struck her like clean cold water. Free. After nights hiding in brush, after the brand and the fear and the shame that was never hers to carry. The chain was gone. Blackwell gagged at the edge of the flowers, spitting blood. You do not understand, he hissed. There are others, more yards, more women. Then we will find them, Hartwell said, and we will break every gate. By the time Jacob tied off the last strip of linen, the sun had lifted, washing the clearing in gold. Caleb's eyes were open, muddy but focused, tracking Lydia Mae. He squeezed her fingers when she leaned near. Will he live? She asked Jacob. If we ride now and keep these wounds clean, Jacob said. He's tougher than he looks, hard as old leather. They rigged a stretcher from saplings and blankets and lashed it between two saddles. Caleb let them move him without complaint, jaw tight, breath whistling. Hartwell trotted back from Blackwell's horse with a small leather pouch and pressed it into Lydia Mae's palm. "Found this in his bags," he said, "coin and paper. Compensation is a poor word for what was taken from you, but it is a start." She stared down at the pouch, then across at the man who had worn a star like a mask. His power over her ended here, in a ring of crushed lupine and trampled grass. Whether he died or stood up tomorrow did not matter. He could not own anyone again. "What will you do now?" Hartwell asked, as they swung up and turned toward Redstone. Lydia Mae looked at Caleb stretched between the horses, pale but alive and watching her. She looked at the men who had ridden into gunfire for the sake of strangers. "Live," she said. "We are going to live." They moved at a careful pace. Jacob riding close, checking bandages, keeping pressure where blood threatened to leak through. Word outran them on the road, carried by dust and rumor. By the time they crossed into Redstone, doors had opened and faces lined the street. No one jeered, no one looked away. Mrs. Whitfield stepped out from the general store with her ledger under her arm and worry on her face. "What can I do, dear?" she asked Lydia Mae. "The blue cloth," Lydia Mae said, voice catching. "I would like to make a proper dress." Mrs. Whitfield's smile trembled but held. "I will have it waiting, no charge." They carried Caleb into Doc Matthews's office, the sour tang of carbolic already rolling out the door. The doctor, a spare man with a clean apron and steady eyes, barked orders without heat: clear the table, scissors, hot water, whiskey. Jacob, you swab and hand. Hartwell, you hold him when I go digging. Lydia Mae stood aside long enough for the first cut, then moved to where she could help without getting in the way. She boiled water, tore lengths of the blue cloth into bandage, kept sending them under Doc's hands. When the bullet lodged near the ribs came free. The doctor held it up, slick and ugly. "You brought him in time," he said. "Luck and stubbornness did their parts. Now, cleanliness and rest will have to do the rest." Outside, Hartwell posted 2 of his men at the door. If Blackwell's friends rode, they would find Redstone was not the same town they had planned to bully. Hartwell returned to the office with a telegram folded in quarters. "Came off the wire just now." He told Doc and Lydia Mae, "Rangers out of Austin tore down 3 more of those yards last week, seized ledgers, names, payments, routes. It is unraveling." Lydia Mae's hand went to the place on her thigh where the iron had scarred her. The pain had faded long ago. The memory had not. She breathed through it, let it pass, and looked back at Caleb. His eyes were closed, but the lines of his face had eased. Sleep, not shock. By evening, the town had settled into a hush. Mrs. Whitfield set a covered tray on the desk. Broth, bread, coffee for the doctor when his hands start to shake. "You will need strength," she told Lydia Mae, and squeezed her arm before leaving. Hartwell came once more to the doorway. He held out a folded piece of paper. "The sheriff's star from Blackwell," he said. "I do not know if he lives. I do not much care. But this is proof enough for Austin, and they will ask you to swear what you saw. Can you do that?" "I can," Lydia Mae said. "I will." He nodded, hat in his hands. "Folks will talk all kinds of ways about what happened between those trees. Let them. We will keep you safe here. Tomorrow, if the doc says it is wise, we will move Caleb to my place. There is the room and quiet there." "Thank you," she said, and the words felt too small. He gave a half smile. Just doing what a man ought to have done before. Night came warm and still. The lamp burned low, the doctor snoring in his chair at last. Lydia Mae sat by Caleb's bed, the brass ring of his borrowed pistol lying on the windowsill where the last light could find it. She stitched by feel more than sight, the blue fabric slipping through her fingers, growing into a simple dress that would look right under a Texas sun. Caleb stirred near midnight. He found her hand without opening his eyes. "You still here," he murmured. "I am not going anywhere," she said. "Good," he whispered, drifting. "Whole world looks different when you're near." She watched him sleep and let the town's quiet settle into her bones. She thought about vows made under her breath in a clearing full of guns. She thought about how freedom had a sound. And it was not the shout of men, but the small ordinary noises of life continuing. A broom on a porch, a dog trotting home, a woman folding cloth and deciding what comes next. At dawn, the bell over the church on the hill rang once. Hartwell stood outside with 2 rangers in dust coats, the telegram already in their hands. They would ride for the other places on the list. There would be trials and headlines and men who tried to pretend they had not known, but door by door, the dark would be dragged into daylight. Doc Matthews woke creaky and cheerful as a man who has pulled someone back from the edge. He checked Caleb's color, nodded at the pulse, and said the word Lydia Mae had been holding her breath to hear. Healing. She set the last stitch in the blue dress and tied it off neat. When Caleb woke again, she would hang it near the window so the light could find the sky-colored flowers printed across it. The world was not fixed, not yet, but pieces were stitching together. Hartwell stepped in with news. "Austin wants statements by week's end," he said, "and there is a room ready for you both out at my ranch when Doc lets him travel." Lydia Mae looked from Hartwell to Caleb and back. "We will come," she said. "Then we will go home, out to Clearwater Creek when it is safe." Hartwell tipped his hat. "When you do, I reckon you will find friends for neighbors." When he left, she moved to the bedside, leaned close, and spoke softly so only Caleb would hear. "We are free," she said, "not just for a day, for good, outside." Redstone woke to the business of morning, inside. Lydia Mae rested her head on her arms beside the man who had chosen her freedom over his own safety. The future waited just beyond the window, bright as a new dress hanging in the light. "Live," she said, and meant it. The promise held through long days and quiet nights in Redstone while Doc Matthews worked at Caleb's side and Lydia Mae kept the room bright with fresh water and clean bandage and the soft murmur of a voice that would not let a man drift too far from the world. News spread along the boardwalks faster than a stage. Folks stepped aside when Hartwell's riders brought supplies. No one asked questions that did not need asking. 6 weeks slid forward, and the prairie put on its royal colors. Blue wildflowers rolled across high-wind prairie like pieces of sky, and paintbrush lit the limestone with strokes of red. Breezes carried the green scent of cedar and young grass. The morning light had a gold edge that felt like a handshake. Caleb stood in the doorway of the rebuilt cabin that looked out toward Clearwater Creek. His shoulder barked when the weather turned, and he still moved careful. But the lines around his eyes were not pain lines anymore. Lydia Mae knelt in a patch of turned soil. The blue dress she had sewn from Mrs. Whitfield's cloth bright against the garden rose. "Tomatoes," she called, brushing dirt from her palms. "We will be slicing them by July." "Sounds good," Caleb said, stepping onto the porch and letting the sun warm his face. "Been thinking on that trip we talked about." Maybe ride down to the city when the heat lets up. See a little more of the world than the inside of my stubborn skull. They had been making small plans at first. Fresh hinges on the door, a second chair by the table, then bigger ones crept in. A visit to see the sea one day, maybe stand under tall pines in a place neither of them had ever been. Hope did not shout. It stacked little pieces until one morning you noticed it had built a house. "I have something for you," Caleb said, hand drifting to his pocket. Lydia Mae looked up. Dirt smudged her cheek. Curiosity lit her eyes. "What sort of something?" Instead of answering, he brought out a ring he'd been worrying over for a month. He had heated the brass from the last cartridge he carried home from the war. He had hammered it in small circles on the back step until the metal turned from hard to willing. It was not a jeweler's work. The surface held the story of his clumsy hands. But the morning light caught in it and did not want to let go. "Caleb Ward," she said, softness wrapped around his name. "Lydia Mae," he said, and dropped to one knee in the garden dirt. "I'm not much by any fair measure. Banged up, short on cash, long on stubborn. But I love you more than I thought a man could love anyone." He held out the ring. "I took that last bullet I was saving for trouble and turned it into something useful. Figured I would rather make a promise than keep a war." Her hands shook a little when she touched it. "It is beautiful," she told him, and then laughed through tears. "Might turn my finger green. I will whittle you a second if it does," he said. She looked straight through the scars and the careful way he carried himself and found the man who had stepped between her and a world that tried to claim her. "Yes," she said, then said it again because the word felt good. "Yes, I will marry you, you mule-headed good man." He slid the ring on, and it settled there like it had been waiting for the finger since brass was invented. "We all carry things," he said. "The question is whether we are strong enough to carry them together." They held each other while the mockingbirds ran through their thousand-song library in the live oaks. When they finally stood, grinning like they had discovered a treasure no one else could see, she twisted the ring so the light flashed. "When?" she asked. "Soon as we can do it proper," he said. "There is a whitewashed chapel on the ridge outside Redstone with a bell that speaks clear down the valley." "I was thinking that one." "I like that," she said. "Think folks will come." "Mrs. Whitfield will," he said without hesitation. "Samuel Hartwell and his household for certain. Doc Matthews swore he would stand witness and keep an eye on me so I do not faint dead away." "More than you think," he added. "People see what is right and want to stand near it." The next weeks ran on bright rails. Lydia Mae turned white cotton into a dress simple as a prayer. Mrs. Whitfield opened a small box and laid out a line of pearl buttons saved from her grandmother's gown. She sewed them on with tiny neat stitches while telling stories that made Lydia Mae smile. Caleb polished the single good suit that had survived the years and bought boots that had never met buckshot. Hartwell offered his ranch for a gathering after the vows. Martha Hartwell wrote lists and assigned pies the way a general assigns positions, all in kindness and good order. A boy with a fiddle promised to tune until the strings sang sweet. Word traveled without noise. A jar of flowers appeared on the cabin steps one morning with no note. A preacher's wife sent a cake recipe tied with twine. A neighbor, Lydia Mae barely knew, dropped off a small lace veil because it belonged on a day like this. The morning finally came, clear and bright, with a breeze that took the edge off the heat. The chapel stood white on the ridge, and the river cut a silver line across the valley below. inside. Lydia Mae adjusted her dress one last time in a little side room. Martha had worked magic with pins and a spray of wildflowers. Mrs. Whitfield fastened the small cameo at her collar and stepped back, eyes shining. "You look ready," Martha said. "Not nervous, dear." "No," Lydia Mae said, surprised to hear the truth in it. "Ready." The chapel filled past what either of them expected. Faces from Redstone and the outlying ranches, men who had ridden into gunfire because they could not stomach a lie, women who knew what the word brand meant and had decided their town would not forget that lesson. Children went solemn for a minute and then smiled because the room felt good. Reverend William Hayes had hair like winter grass and eyes that could be stern when a man needed straightening and gentle when a person needed mercy. He spoke about love as work and as choice. He talked about how beauty can grow in soil that has seen storms if two people keep tending it and never stop weeding. When it came time for promises, Caleb spoke first. His voice carried without strain, steady as a fence post set right. "Lydia Mae, I will stand with you against whatever rides over the horizon. I will see you for who you are, not for what was done to you. I will love the steel that kept you alive and the kindness that keeps me human." Lydia Mae answered with a voice that did not shake even as tears lined her cheeks. "Caleb, I will build a life with you made of choice and not fear. I will trust what we are making day by day. I will love you with the scars included because they are part of how we found each other." When Reverend Hayes set their hands together and spoke the words that turned two into one household, the bell rang once, and folks cheered like rain had come after a hard, dry spell. They kissed in a sunbeam that fell through the west window, and Lydia Mae felt something she had never expected to feel in this life, celebrated, not hidden, not owned, chosen and choosing. The gathering at Hartwell Ranch was the kind of evening that makes a memory settle in for the long haul. Lanterns hung between oaks blew softly in the breeze. The band found an easy pocket and kept folks moving without running anyone ragged. Children ranged free and laughed in the grass. Martha's tables groaned under pies and roasted meat and a cake that made the preacher's wife blush when folks praised it. When the sun lowered and the first stars pricked the sky, Lydia Mae and Caleb slipped to the porch steps for a breath. "No regrets?" he asked, thumb tracing the brass ring. "About what?" she teased. "Any of it. The fighting, the running, the choosing to stand instead of hide." Months earlier she would have said that the only road worth traveling was the quiet one, keeping your head down and hoping mercy would find you where you crouched. Now she shook her head. "No regrets," she said. "We did what we had to do to be free." "Think Blackwell's people will trouble us?" he asked. "I think they have their hands full," she said. "Hartwell told me the Rangers shut down 3 more places these past weeks. There will be trials and more riding, but that machine is missing too many gears now." They sat with the music sliding out through the dark and the hum of people who had decided to be neighbors in the best sense of the word. When the night wound down and horses were being bridled, Hartwell called Caleb aside near the hitching rail and pressed an envelope into his hand. "A wedding present," the rancher said. Caleb opened it and stared. A deed. 40 acres that joined their current claim along a line of cedar and good soil. "Sam, I cannot take this." "You can," Hartwell said, "and you will. A man who stood where you stood deserves a place to plant deep roots. Besides, I figure you will be fine neighbors, and I like the sound of children in a valley." They rode home under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had shaken diamonds across black velvet. Lydia Mae rode behind Caleb with her arms around him, cheek against his back. The ring caught the moonlight each time her hand shifted. Not perfect metal, but it was honest, and it was theirs, at the cabin. Caleb carried her over the threshold while she laughed and told him to mind his shoulder. Inside, everything was plain and right. The table they had sanded smooth, the shelf with the few books he could not part with, the bed with fresh linen and the window that knew how to catch morning. "What do we do now?" she asked, turning in the small room with her hands spread like she could touch each corner at once. "We live," he said, pulling her close. "We live free, and we live together, and we do not let anyone make us into anything we are not." Outside, the night settled around their roof like a warm quilt. The creek went on talking to the rocks. Somewhere a coyote yipped and then thought better of it. Inside, two people who had fought their way back from the edge of what people can stand began the quiet daily business of a life made from love and work. The war behind them had taken much. The road ahead would ask its price, but the door was open and the lamp was lit. And when morning came, the garden would be waiting for hands that knew how to grow things. The bell at the chapel had barely gone quiet before life began to stretch in front of them like a sunlit road. Back at the cabin, the lamp burned low and steady, and the ring on Lydia Mae's finger clicked softly when she set a kettle on the hook. Morning came with the smell of cedar and wet earth from the garden rose. Caleb rose slow, careful of the scars that tugged when he forgot, and stoked the coals until a bright tongue of flame took. They walked their new boundary that first week. The deed from Samuel Hartwell folded in Caleb's pocket like a lucky note. 40 acres of good dirt and limestone shelves, a line of cedar, and a draw that carried Clearwater Creek water after hard rain. They talked as they walked, not the talk of fear and plans to run, but the plain kind that builds a future. A peach stand along the south fence, a smokehouse by the big live oak, a second room off the back of the cabin so a child would never have to sleep near a door that once held a bar. Lydia Mae paused where the grass lay pressed by deer and looked east, her hand shading her eyes. She took a slow breath and let it out. "I remember standing in yards where the sky was the only open thing," she said. "This feels different, like the ground itself is on our side." Caleb squeezed her hand. "The land likes to be worked by people who listen to it," he said. "We will listen." Word traveled that Jonah Blackwell had not lived out the week. Some swore they heard him cursing the world as the light left him. Others said he went quiet at the end. However it was, the shape of his power had cracked. Hartwell's riders brought news that rangers from Austin were rolling up false contracts and turning men over to judges who had not forgotten what a signature is supposed to mean. The machine still groaned in places, but its belts were slipping. A ranger captain rode into Redstone 2 weeks after the wedding. He wore a plain coat, dust on the cuffs, and carried himself like a man who knew storms up close. Name was Avery Pike. He found Caleb and Lydia Mae at Mrs. Whitfield's counter choosing cloth for curtains and a baby quilt they did not yet have reason to sew. Only hope. Captain Pike tipped his hat and asked for talk in private. "We need statements," he said in a voice that did not pry. "Not to carve you up with questions. To put nails in the right board so the wind stops whistling through the law. Names, places, what you saw. Your word will help close doors on men who still think people can be owned." Lydia Mae's fingers touched the cameo at her collar. For a long moment, the general store went quiet around them. Then she nodded. "I will write it," she said. "I will not stand in a room and answer to stares. Not yet. But I will write what happened, and I will sign my name without shaking." Pike took off his hat the way a man does in church. That is more than enough. They set a table by the cabin window that evening, and Lydia Mae began. Clearwater Creek was mentioned first because that is where her life had turned. She wrote about the yard where numbers were used instead of names without putting paint on what did not need it. She wrote the word property only once, then crossed it out and wrote "My body is mine." She set down the names she knew and left blank space for those she did not. Caleb sat at the hearth and kept the kettle filled. When her hand cramped, he rubbed the tightness from her fingers and said nothing until the words came back. When the last period landed on the page, Lydia Mae stared at the neat lines. She did not feel small. She felt placed. The ranger came at first light and folded the pages like they were made of thin glass. He thanked them and did not offer any empty comfort. Before he mounted, he looked toward the ridge. "There are other places," he said. "We will reach them. Your writing will help light the way there." Days turned honest. Caleb and Hartwell spent a morning cutting posts for the new fence. The rancher worked with the easy grace of a man who has swung a hammer his whole life. They talked about water and coyotes and how far corn likes to be from the house. After noon, Mrs. Whitfield came out with a basket and a laugh and made the men sit. Then fussed that Lydia Mae was too thin and set an extra biscuit on her plate. Not long after, a woman from town came nervous up the path. Her name was Ruth Ann, and she had a scar at her hairline that looked like the trace of a lightning strike. She had heard that Lydia Mae was starting a sewing circle by the creek. Not the kind that gossips, the kind that mends and listens. Lydia Mae watched Ruth Ann twist the hem of her skirt and remembered how it felt when words were stuck behind your ribs. "I am no leader," Lydia Mae said. "I can thread a needle and make coffee. That may be enough." It was. Once a week, a handful of women came down to Clearwater Creek and sat under the live oaks where the water talked just loud enough to make secrets feel safe. They sewed shirts for ranch hands and tiny dresses from leftover cloth. They practiced saying their own names until the sound sat right in the mouth. Sometimes they spoke of Blackwell. Sometimes they did not. Always they parted, standing up a little straighter. Caleb kept his own counsel in those hours. He worked the new plot, scratched a line for beans, and learned the creek's moods. In the evenings, he would tell Lydia Mae what he had noticed. The way bluebirds liked the fence wire. The way the creek went clear after a hard rain if you waited and did not stir the mud. The way her laugh had changed, softer and also stronger, like a violin that finally got tuned. A letter arrived from Reverend Hayes on a day when thunderheads stacked like mountains over the prairie. He wrote that his church bell sounded different now, and that the town had taken to pausing in the street when it rang. "Folks remember that truth still counts," he said. He added that he would come bless the new boundary if they wanted a pastor to walk it. Caleb wrote back that blessings never hurt and to bring a hammer if he did not mind, since there were still 2 stray boards by the north fence. Toward the end of summer, they rode into Redstone at dusk and stood on the boardwalk watching a train of wagons pass. The driver of the first wagon lifted 2 fingers in greeting. Beside him sat a girl with her hair cut neat around her face and a blue ribbon tied smart at the nape of her neck. She saw Lydia Mae and touched that ribbon like a secret. Lydia Mae touched the cameo back and smiled. On the ride home, the air held that sweet edge that means heat is loosening its grip. They paused at the spring where they had once crouched in the dark with guns and promises. Fireflies stitched light in the shadows. Caleb leaned against the limestone and looked out across what was theirs. "You know," he said, "we never did talk about carving our initials into the porch post like folks do." She ran a thumb over the brass ring. "I do not need letters in wood," she said. "I have this, and this house, and your hand in mine. But if you want to mark something, plant that peach stand tomorrow. When the first fruit comes, we will know what our names taste like." They walked back to the cabin in the soft dark. The window glowed ahead like a small star that belonged to them. Inside, the table waited, and the bed, and a stack of mended shirts for men who had held their ground. The war was over for them, and the running, and the long nights of listening for hoofbeats that meant pain. What lay ahead would still ask courage, but the road belonged to them now, and they were already walking it side by side. At its heart, this story is about dignity, courage, and the quiet strength to keep living when life has done its worst. For older generations, it reminds us of truths we already know, that freedom is rarely given, but often earned through endurance and sacrifice. Caleb and Lydia Mae's journey shows us that scars, whether on the body or in the heart, do not make us lesser. They are marks of survival, reminders of what we've overcome. Many of us, looking back over long years, carry wounds that may never fully heal, but like them, we can choose to turn pain into purpose and find hope in new beginnings. Their story is not just about guns and battles. It is about simple things: planting a garden, sewing a dress, holding someone's hand in the quiet after storms. Even late in life, we can build something beautiful from the pieces left to us. The lesson is simple yet profound. We are not defined by what others have done to us, but by what we choose to do with the days still in front of us. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience, dignity, and hope to life. We're grateful to have you here.